Welcome back to Taberna, dear friends and detractors. We are here with a proper episode to discuss a topic. Joining me in Taberna to discuss Sedevacantism is back from prison, Monsieur Trillian.
Hey.
And once again with us, our usual co-host, Classical Theist.
Hello.
And then our special guest who is an expert in the topic for tonight's discussion of I was a teenage Sedevacantist. Well, he was more like in his early 20s, but is Serp Kirk.
Hey, nice to have me. I appreciate it.
It is nice to have you. I like it. It's very Celtic of you that you just say you are so that it's we are so graced to have your presence as a guest.
I leave you in the grace and favor of the Lord.
Yeah. But, so we're going to talk about Sedevacantism because our good friend Serp here spent time as a Sedevacantist. Is that right?
Not only that, I attended a Sedevacantist chapel for something like 6, 7, 8 months. So it's not like I just followed the Diamond Brothers and stopped going to the Novus Ordo or something. I attended a Sedevacantist chapel and I communicated with Sedevacantist priests and stuff.
Like Chicada?
Yeah, I had a correspondence with Father Chicada.
So, we're doing this episode because the recent motu proprio makes certain positions very appealing, and a priest even in a sermon recently admitted that, you know, these thoughts passed his mind. And I believe Anthony Stein of Return to Tradition, which is a very, very good news channel. And
he's a great guy. Yeah,
he's a very good guy. He's got a lot of good content. Don't always 100% agree with his takes, but he's definitely worth listening to. Return to Tradition YouTube channel. He's been found on YouTube. He told the story of a young priest who... it's kind of fuzzy if his bishop Latia sententiated him, that is, you know, excommunicated him. But one thing's for sure, he left his ministry to go to Bishop Sanborn Seminary at Holy Trinity in Florida. And so this motu proprio's got a lot of people thinking, so we figured it would be good to have a nice little tavern chat about Sedevacantism. So, any opening thoughts before we go on, gentlemen? Particularly my two co-hosts, Trillian and CT.
The first thing I want to start is please don't become a Sedevacantist. You are going to become absolutely insufferable. No, I'm serious, though, when I say this, okay? If you become a Sedevacantist, you will be cut off from the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity, especially charity, almost without fail. You're going to become insufferable. Sorry, that's just true.
At least on the internet. Definitely not true in real life, I would say, which is a grave threat. A Sedevacantism is that Sedevacantism, in the Francis years, is shedded, in its public life, is shedded much of the aggressiveness and end of the worldness and schizo-pilledness, you could say, and become much more even-handed in my experience.
No, I wonder about that. Why do you think that is? Now, do you think that might be more prevalent among the Sedes who have become Sedevacantists through the Francis papacy?
I think it's through inheritance. I think that, well, it's through inheritance in the sense that it's been established for how many years? For 40-odd years, if not 50-odd years. And so that people that were the first generation, they've had children, and their children are more normal than their parents, and they've stayed Sedevacantist. And it's really stabilized it. So when you go to, like, I don't know, or Bishop Sanborn's YouTube page and you look at his new priests, they don't seem too schizo. They don't seem to be the Diamond Brothers. They don't even seem to be the considerably less schizo Bishop Sanborn than the Diamond Brothers. They seem to be relatively much more adjusted.
Regression to the mean.
They're basically regressing to the mean, and they're having lots of kids.
Yeah, I've met a Sedevacantist lady whose husband did not attend chapel, but she and her kids did, and she was a very, very nice lady. And she actually even like recommended Taylor Marshall to me, which kind of threw me through a loop, because I know when we were all doing the good fight back in our old corners of the internet, I would not have expected something like that from a Sedevacantist.
Right.
And that's partly because Father Shikata, being the online well-read Sedevacantist, basically he was very, very spiteful, rest his soul, but he was very, very spiteful towards the Society of St. Pius X. And that he created this image of like the seething like hatred and constant attacking, like he's trying to pillage them of like followers, while there's a lot of people that are openly, that they're personally Sedevacantists, that go to SSPX chapels.
So why don't we do a little bit of history? So why don't we define it and talk about how the position came about? What is Sedevacantism for those that have been preserved from knowing about such things?
Can I define it?
Sure.
Sedevacantism is the idea that there has not been a valid pope for quite some time. It comes from sede vacante, which means the chair is vacant in Latin, which traditionally refers to the period between papal elections. Sedevacantists use this term to describe the fact that the chair has, in their opinion, been vacant usually since 1958, because that's when Pius XII died and John the 23rd was elected, and John the 23rd is the one who first convened the Second Vatican Council. And they argue that because of the tremendous discontinuity they claim exists between Vatican II and the pre-Vatican II Church, that the popes must have been heretics, and according to their reasoning and their interpretations of canon law, must have, by the very fact, ipso facto, lost their offices.
Right. That's very important to recognize that that their position on this stems from a canonical, a juridical opinion about whether or not heresy can coexist with really any prelate maintaining his office, and they certainly would squarely believe that when it could be a bishop, but for their purposes a pope, when he becomes now there's a bit of dispute on this. So some would say when he becomes a formal heretic, that is to say when he professes heresy knowingly and willingly, then at that point he instantly becomes he instantly loses his office, because he ceases to be a member of that over which he is supposed to be the head, and that to them would be an absurdity. Or they would say that his heresy has to be public, it has to be manifest, it has to be pertinacious, and once those three elements of his heresy are established and readily knowable to the mind, at that point he automatically loses his heresy. So or his office rather.
For those listening, pertinacious means extremely stubborn, sticking to it
Right,
after multiple
yeah.
corrections.
Right, like
Right, yeah.
like Martin Luther.
And now, I mean,
Yes.
and we'll get into like some difficulties with this, because they really don't give you a mechanism by which this could be identified, and really established as public fact. They don't really provide much of a mechanism for that. I'm sure a Serp can maybe give us some insight on their literature on such a mechanism. But
Typically, what they'll say is that it's just so obvious at this point
yes,
that you would just have to conclude it. And there's a tendency, not among all Sedevacantists, but many Sedevacantists, to assume that if you disagree with someone, whether that's obvious or not, you must be arguing in bad faith, which actually tends to be where a lot of the lack of charity comes from.
They definitely have this sense that it should be self-establishing, that you should just simply see something like the Latin Mass and then compare it to the Novus Ordo and instantly understand that the Novus Ordo is in some sense a new religion that is completely hostile to what they would call the traditional Catholic faith. That this is essentially common knowledge, and that everything else is essentially, these apologetics that they have against the Society of St. Pius X or something.
So,
at least those who are speakers on the internet. I think if you talk to maybe a normal lay Sedevacantist, you might get something more along the lines as, I feel it's this way, but we don't know, and it's like the Great Western Schism. I feel like a lay Sedevacantist would try and say, I feel this is true, this is what I believe, but I don't think they would say that you can be not in Sedevacantist and be Catholic.
You can distinguish between dogmatic Sedevacantists who basically think that if you are not a Sedevacantist, you're going to hell, and most real-life Sedevacantists who are just very agnostic on the issue, and they're confused, and they're just like, look, I don't think there's a pope right now, and so I go to this particular church, which I think gives me the sacraments and continues the faith.
I've encountered that before.
The latter group of Sedevacantists are a lot quieter, but they're actually often pretty decent people. My earlier comments notwithstanding.
The problem with this is, like, the Most Holy Family Monastery outweighs every other Sedevacantist that has ever lived. In terms of its
online
reach.
presence.
Yes. In the sense that to most people in common speaking, it's synonymous with Sedevacantism. So you'll talk about Sedevacantism with people on the internet, and they'll be surprised to hear that it's extremely rare for any Sedevacantist really to be Feeneyites, while the Most Holy Family Monastery is very strict Feeneyites.
Yeah, the Diamond Betters, for those who don't know that's what their organization is technically called.
I mean, they literally treat this basically essentially a dogma.
VaticanCatholic.com.
So Feeneyites, of course, are people who stress very, very, very strongly visible membership in the visible church as absolutely essential to salvation, with no exceptions. The problem is that as a Sedevacantist, you basically have to hold that the visible church has kind of gone underground or kind of disintegrated.
It's a catacomb church, to steal a Orthodox term.
And so the only way you can actually justify Feeneyitism and Sedevacantism is usually by having a position where you think that you're more or less the visible continuation of the Catholic Church. In such a Catholic ecclesiology, the Pope is the primary principle of the unity and visibility of the Church. People like the Diamond Brothers, to maintain their position, de facto at least, set themselves up as a kind of ersatz Pope. And so it gives them a very, very cultic and fanatical flavor.
And they even ascribe to themselves like their own place in
ecclesiology.
In ecclesiology and like prophetic passages in the Book of Apocalypse even.
Yeah, it's So
Is it just something somebody put on Wikipedia? Was John Veneri actually part of the Most Holy Family Monastery at some point?
I don't know about that,
Oh,
but
Okay.
uh, so if that's the case, that we basically have this mass apostasy and that there's an imposter church among the dogmatic Sedevacantist position, Serp, then where do your sacraments come from? How does that work? And
Yeah, how does sacraments work instead of Sedevacantism?
mm-hmm.
Well, there are two thoughts of this. Again, there's this very small group, which the Diamond Brothers might be a part of. I haven't known. Which
they're very
believes,
hypocritical about it.
but there's this small group that believes that essentially there are no holy orders or sacraments. These are called home aloners, that essentially believe that after I assume Pius XII, after he stopped being a pope, only the bishops that he created and the sees that he created held jurisdiction, so that any priests that are coming afterwards are doing so in mortal sin without the jurisdiction of a pope. And these people are home aloners. Most people, there are many Sedevacantists that are in fact home aloners. Home alone basically means that they either practice it without a congregation, or with their family, or without a congregation is how they practice their faith.
Yeah. Typically, the Diamond Brothers will just recommend you pray 15 decades of the Rosary a day and tell you not to go to Mass.
Mm-hmm. Now there are Sedevacantist parishes that have been established, mostly starting in the 80s. Their holy orders come from one of two places: Archbishop Thuc, and here I gotta come up with his name just a second. And that's where, I don't know if you ever heard of the CMRI. That's where their holy orders come from, or that's where Trento in Mexico's holy orders come from. That's where the MBC's holy orders come from. And then another one is the Society of St. Pius V. They take their holy orders from, I'm trying to find his name here. He was a Puerto Rican bishop that was retired that consecrated them as bishops.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting because both the Thucite bishops, you could say, and I believe it's Gonzalez. I can't find his name right now. I believe it's Gonzalez, but I don't have his full name. Yeah, it's Alfredo Mendez Gonzalez.
Mm-hmm.
So the Society of St. Pius V and the Thucite bishops often accuse each other of not having valid ordinations, and that if you want to go to a Society of St. Pius V church, you can't go to a CMRI church. That if you go to a Society of St. Pius V church, you'll have to go through a general confession as if you committed apostasy if you go to a Thucite church, which are common in the United States.
Yeah.
CMRI or Congregation of Mary the Immaculate Queen, which started out as a cult, by the way.
Well, okay, what do you mean by that? Let's
The Congregation of Mary the Immaculate Queen started out as part of the Blue Army Rosary movement, as an offshoot of it. Its original founder was a guy named Francis Schuckart, who took old Catholic orders and then created a cult, which lasted until, I believe, 1984, when many of the members of the CMRI ousted him. He was eventually imprisoned, and then after that period, they were all reordained under the orders of Archbishop Thuc from Mexican bishops. And now the CMRI is the largest congregation and collection of Sedevacantist priests in the world. They operate mostly in the United States, but I believe they have parishes into Canada and Mexico, as well as a few into Europe.
So how did these orders come to be?
Okay, well, yeah, so the CMRI was, Francis Schuckart was originally part of This was in Spokane, Washington, and he is originally part of the Blue Army of Mary Rosary movement, and he left that, founded the CMRI with many of his followers. He was ordained an Old Catholic priest, and they had Old Catholic orders. For those of you that don't know, outside of Sedevacantism and somewhat connected to it is independent Catholicism, which is also loosely affiliated with Old Catholicism. Old Catholics are people that refuse to recognize Vatican I as a legitimate council and hold to conciliarism, and holy orders have proliferated widely throughout them. They vary in line from being essentially Catholics that are conciliarists to hyper-liberal, gay priests, or sometimes even Gnostics. They'll accept Gnostic scripture and strange things. It's because they essentially some of them view holy orders as something to be given away very lightly. And so there's this underground...
They see it as white magic.
Yes. Yeah, well, there are some that are magicians that use the holy orders as white magic.
In the occultic sense.
Yes, in the occultic sense. But they'll stream holy orders, and they'll take, say, Orthodox bishop orders and then be consecrated in Old Catholic orders and so on and so forth multiple times to ensure that they have correct orders and all kinds of stuff. So there's a wide variety, and there's many independent Catholic churches. So there's a very large one in Brazil and another very large one in the Philippines, which are national Catholic churches. But anyway, to get that, do you guys have any questions about independent Catholicism or Old Catholicism before I get to the other Sedevacantist orders and histories?
No, go on. I think that's interesting trivia, but we can talk about it more later if there's time.
Okay, so we covered the CMRI. They go through Thuc orders. Thuc consecrated... There were 2 Mexican priests, I believe, that formed Trento, and Bishop Thuc consecrated 2 of them. It was founded by Moses Camara, who was he consecrated as a bishop. Thuc, by the way, was the brother of
DM, right?
Yes, DM, who is the DM Thuc, who was the dictator of South Vietnam until the CIA arranged for him to be assassinated so that he could be moved out of the way. He was a very devout Catholic dictator who gave special privileges to army officers and intelligence officers and businessmen who were Catholic above all others in South Vietnam. And the Buddhists started protesting this pretty intensely. If you ever saw...
Setting themselves on fire.
Yeah, the infamous photo on the Rage Against the Machine's first album is from that. And the United States took the side of the Buddhist and killed Thuc, or killed DM, Nego DM, and Thuc, who was in the Second Vatican Council, could never return to South Vietnam, or after the war ended, Vietnam proper, and was stuck as a bishop stuck in Europe without any friends or without other countrymen. And he ended up consecrating, acting as a streamer for Old Catholics to reconsecrate them, consecrated 3 Sedevacantist bishops, and in fact consecrated 5 members of the cult of Palmer de Troya, which after that elected an anti-pope and became a very intense cult, which
Would you like
believes
to
in
get
very
into that
bizarre
at all?
things. Yeah, we can get into that later. But that's part of conclavism, which is a very extreme brand of Sedevacantism, which believes that they have to elect a pope. The 2 most famous instances are the cult of Palmer de Troya and Pope Michael.
So why did Cardinal Thuc? Because
Archbishop Thuc.
Oh right, he wasn't a cardinal.
No, he was not a cardinal. He was an archbishop of Waste City, I believe.
Okay, so why did he consecrate Archbishop Thuc? Do all of this? Why did he consecrate all these people?
Okay, there's varying theories of why this happened. One theory could be that he had dementia. A second theory is that he wasn't, he was only made a bishop as a way to kind of, I don't know how to say it, humor DM as dictator that the Vatican did, and he wasn't actually very well taught as a bishop. And there's some truth to this. For instance, during Vatican II, he suggested that Asians should be able to take communion using chopsticks. So some people will say that he allied with traditional Catholicism not because he was religiously conservative or traditional. I shouldn't say conservative in this context. He wasn't religiously right-wing. He was pretty moderate or even slightly liberal. But in fact, he was a member of the extreme right, which you can't really deny. So there's that. So he just didn't understand. He was never really taught very well, and he reached his old age. He didn't understand that you shouldn't consecrate people. You could say that he did become a Sedevacantist, and then he was kidnapped and forced to renounce Sedevacantism because he has a letter of Sedevacantism, which seems very half-hearted, and then he died reconciled to the church, living in a Vietnamese refugee monastery in the United States.
Wait, he was kidnapped to reconcile?
Yeah, Sedevacantists claim that he was kidnapped and forced to reconcile by refugee Vietnamese people living in the United States. I think it was a Franciscan monastery of refugee Vietnamese people. And Sedevacantists claim he was kidnapped. That would fit well into the idea that he has dementia. There's another thing that might be part of the dementia thing. These aren't necessarily what you would call mutually exclusive. Keep in mind that he that he was a very lonely Vietnamese refugee that had no money. So this could be simony, or it could be basically that that's the only way you could get friends or any attention is, consecrating people as bishops and running around with the Sedevacantists.
Like a non-financial form of simony.
Yeah, a friendship simony. So those are various theories as to why he consecrated the people.
And you got to get credit down the ages for coming up with the term friendship simony.
Yeah, so it's simony is an argument, dementia is an argument. Maybe he really was a Sedevacantist and he was kidnapped. Those are the various arguments. So he consecrated 2 Mexican bishops, was founded Trento, and the CMRI, their holy orders come for that, and Bishop Sanborn and the Roman, I think it's called the Roman Catholic Institute, their holy orders descend from that. And then you also have the Society of St. Pius V, which are 9 priests that were kicked out of the Society of St. Pius X during the preparation for the talks to regularize the society in 1986 that ended up ending with the consecration of the bishops and the excommunication in 1988. Part of it was that Archbishop Lefebvre excised these Sedevacantist bishops who refused to do...
You mean priests, right?
Priests, sorry. Three of them have become bishops in the meantime. But anyway, these 9 priests were excised, and they founded the Order of Society of St. Pius V, partially because they're Sedevacantist, and partially because they refused to agree to the rubrics of 1962. And many of those priests broke off and left the Society of St. Pius V because of their refusal to have intercommunion with the Congregation Mary the Immaculate Queen and other Thucite orders, I guess. I don't know if that's mean. I don't know. Thuc descended Sedevacantists. And so the Society of St. Pius V, which has grown, their official YouTube page is it's Father Jenkins, and it's are you guys aware of the YouTube page? It's like Catholic,
yeah.
What Catholics
believe.
Yeah,
what Catholics believe.
That's
their official YouTube page.
Sedevacantists always do this, with the Diamond Brothers being VaticanCatholic.com, Sanborn's Roman Catholic Institute.
Or there's just a website called Roman Catholicism, and it's literally run by...
RomanCatholicism.org.
Yeah.
A complete psycho-Jansenist.
Yes.
And so they always have these names so that they can appropriate for themselves the mantle of being the remnant. You know, that the true church subsists in the remnant led by whoever. So, that was all good history for the first half.
Finally, there's the Instituto, I can't pronounce it, but IMBC, which are Society of St. Pius X priests that left in Europe, and they founded their own Sedevacantist order, which operates in Europe. And from my understanding, Argentina as well.
Now, should we also address, just very briefly, the offshoot, the recent sort of, we could maybe call it a spiritual daughter of Sedevacantism, benevacantism?
Yes. Traditional Sedevacantism believes that the line of the papacy ends either with the death of John the 23rd in 63, and that Paul VI is the heretic, which is the first non-pope, or it ends with the election of John, with the death of Pius XII. So there hasn't been at least a pope since Vatican II, and the Vatican II is what invalidates it. Following how crazy, the craziness that has happened under Francis, there's this new movement of people who are Sedevacantists who believe in Vatican II and believe that either Benedict XVI is still currently the Pope, only in secret, and is like basically under lock and key and house arrest, or that Benedict XVI did resign, but Francis has lost the papacy.
So
and this is called mockingly benevacantism.
Right. So people like Anne Barnhart and Brother Bugnolo are two prominent subscribers to that thesis, and I think Brother Bugnolo or Bunello, however his name is pronounced. Forgive me, brother.
Also Mazza.
Who?
I think
Oh yeah, Matthew Mazza. You're right.
Yeah.
Taylor Marshall interviewed him. So but this is very recent. So Serp, I'm gonna invite you.
I think their first benevacantist was Father Paul Kramer.
Yes, I think so. I think you're right, of the Fatima Center.
Mm-hmm.
And
he must have got kicked out of the Fatima Center.
It caused a rupture in the Fatima Center, essentially, from what I understand. So I'm gonna invite you, Serp, to discuss because we've known each other a long time, and we actually knew you online when you were going through this, and I will apologize publicly to how rude I was to you during that time, because I was pretty mean to you, man.
You did call me crazy, but I mean, I probably am crazy.
And I mean, Serp, I apologize for repeatedly rejecting your friend requests for no reason.
I don't know. I probably am crazy, so don't worry about it.
We're all a little bit nuts here.
Except for CT. Except for CT.
Yeah, well.
I don't know.
CT doesn't have Irish blood. CT doesn't have Irish blood.
No, it's worse. For the sake of his identity, I'll keep it a secret, but it's worse. So,
he's white. He's white. He's white.
He's white. So, Serp, I'm gonna invite you to basically give your own witness how you got into Sedevacantism, why, and how you got out of it. And then we
my personal story of Sedevacantism. So I became pretty much religious. So I grew up in a family which was, I don't know, kind of like Stephen Colbert Catholics, maybe, if that makes any sense, where my parents were, blue, red state liberals, like blue dog Democrats, and that, like, my parents would never tell me, like, they believe in abortion until I got much older. and we were raised Catholic because my dad basically believes in the faith, but he has this sort of like, you know, could you describe the Stephen Colbert kind of thing? Maybe you could better than me, like his view of Catholicism.
Right.
Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
Right,
You
where
guys
it's center.
well aware of Stephen Colbert.
It's center left, liberal but not progressive Catholicism. Where it's
Although
like,
I think he is progressive Catholicism, but
your family is probably more like liberal than.
It's a very common thing for working and middle class Irish people to believe in historically.
Yeah, where you believe in the church for cultural reasons, and you believe in God, and like maybe you'll light a candle to a saint once in a while, but like you disagree with the church on like abortion and birth control because hand wave reasons.
Yep, exactly. It's pretty much like that. So I was raised Catholic. We went to church maybe like twice a month. Like it was at least monthly we went to church until I was like in the later elementary school days. And then my parents stopped going to church, and you know, I went through these phases in college, or not in college, but in high school, where I became I was like an atheist for like, you know, 3 months, or like an agnostic for like 3 months, and then I became like this liberal Christian that was interested in Gnosticism. But when I went to college, you know, I just saw just kind of like how debased a lot of you know, woke culture this is at the very cusp of the Great Awakening, and how the awakening was starting to intense, and I just kind of was, you know, dismayed by this and kind of looking towards meaning in life. And I returned to Catholicism, and you know, I started out following the early YouTube page of Bishop Barron, or Father Barron then, and then I just kept going deeper. And then there was this interview that Francis did where he said Catholics should not try and make converts; they shouldn't proselytize. And
the
sorry
Bishop
about my
Barron to
tongue.
Sedevacantist pipeline.
Yeah, the Bishop Barron, the Sedevacantist pipeline, and I was completely scandalized, like how the plain interviews at this time were just scandalizing me of this Bishop Barron to Sedevacantist pipeline. And you know what I did is I found this YouTube video of this speech by this obscure bishop called Bishop Fillet, who talked about all the scandalous things that Pope Francis was saying. And his speech scared me as this little baby sort of liberal, you know, Church of Nice Catholic. They're scary, but they kind of made sense and they sounded cool. So then I kept doing this, and I tried to find any traditional content I could find. And then I found this podcast, True Restoration, which was this, you know, they started out as some of the people were Sedevacantists, some of them weren't. And I found this guy like, you know, Charles Coulombe, who was a good speaker. And he would do these interviews with all these traditional Catholic people, from, you know, Charles Coulombe to Bishop Williamson to, you know, every major Sedevacantist figure, most prominently Bishop Sanborn and Father Shikata. And I watched all the videos that they had, and you know, I became familiar with Sedevacantism, and you know, I kept drawing these lines of things that Francis wouldn't do. Do you want to go ahead now?
So Charles is not a Sedevacantist himself, of course, for the peanut gallery, but he was interviewed by True Restoration a couple times. At a certain point, they basically disinvited him from the podcast.
Yes.
And became much more Sede exclusivist.
Yes.
But continue.
So anyway, I kept drawing these lines now that I knew about Sedevacantism, whereas like, if Francis does this thing, then I'll become a Sedevacantist. And you know, if you watched my videos or you listen to me on this podcast, I'm not the kind of person actually that's like, if you know me in my personal life, if I say I'm going to do something, or if the line is crossed, I actually do follow through. I guess I'm not a cuck or, you know, whatever. Like, I do follow through on things I say. So I think the line it was something like, if he consecrates John Paul II as a saint, then I'm going to become a Sedevacantist. And then he did. And then I became a Sedevacantist. And I searched for a church, and I found a church. And I had to be rebaptized at the church. And then I started receiving communion. And I stayed there for 6 or 7 months. And I was Sedevacantist.
What was it? What was it like? Did you feel at the time relief, or like I'm under Mary's mantle in the remnant when you started going to the chapel, or?
So when you're a Sedevacantist, and I believe that Trillian talked about this, you do feel this sense of like, I am in the remnant, and you get like this quasi I don't know, like Calvinist feel, maybe, where you feel like, you do feel like some sense of eliteness, and it feels good, like this vindication. And that felt good. But it's also like, you do feel like you're really like outside of like the normal world, and you have to exclude yourself. That's how I felt. I had to exclude myself from my normal friends or from other people that would have been Catholic. I had to exclude myself as not to be contaminated.
Tainted.
Yeah, to not be tainted.
So, with that level of security and isolation, then what started to bring you out of it?
Well, my parents found out, and they threatened to kick me out of the house. Actually, to my great shame, I wasn't initially pushed out of Sedevacantism. It was mostly out of like financial reasons. Like, I couldn't really like live alone, and like I couldn't go to church. I couldn't go to Sedevacantist church. I didn't go to any other church, so I just kind of was forced to go online. And you know, this is where I first started to meet classical theists. Like, this is like a long time ago now. Like, this is like 8 years
I remember
ago.
we had very long discussions about it.
This was at the very end of 2015.
Yeah.
Early
No, it might be like 2014.
Maybe the end
Well,
of
yeah. It was at the end of 2014 and at the beginning of 2015.
I remember having lengthy discussions with the Serp about this. I guess I forgot. This was at the end of your grappling with it.
Yes. So like when I started talking to you, I probably would have identified as a Sedevacantist still.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys know like Rel. If we should even talk about that dark place. But I would have been a Sedevacantist when I first entered Rel. I don't even know if we want to explain that. It was a Facebook group which was pan-Christian, which often devolved into like very aggressive.
It was the religious equivalent of pole. It was the religious
devolved
equivalent
into very
of pole.
aggressive anti-Orthodox, anti-Catholic bashing of each other.
It was a different time on Facebook.
Most of these people there. Yeah, this was before. This is like the beginning of like Obama's second term.
Basically,
so this is in the Great Wokening before the Great Censoring, I guess.
Well, I mean, Rel started in 2014, so it was in the middle of his second term. But yeah, Rel is basically where our entire group of friends was forged and found one another
in the fire, in the fires of Rel.
So anyway, if you want, like, what caused me to go back to the Novus Ordo Church, you could say, from the Sedevacantist perspective, to re-accept normal Catholicism.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I read
which
very
we might have to
extensively.
qualify in a minute, but yeah.
Yeah, I read very extensively into church history. Particularly, I learned about a lot of the chaotic popes of the early centuries. How one of the popes, is it Marcellus? Marcellinus apostatized, about Honorius, about Liberius, and so on. And I also read the documents of Vatican II, and it just kind of seemed that like Sedevacantism is based on is a 1-2 punch. Punch number one, okay, Novus Ordo church that you're going to isn't very relevant. Do you want to have a deeper spiritual life? Switch to the Latin Mass. Punch two, you don't know that much about history. You don't know that much about your faith, and you're just doing this like, you know, knee-jerk thing of like, I have to get away from this. This isn't what the true faith really is, and then you go Sedevacantist. And
Right.
when you understand that, like, okay, maybe like Vatican II isn't what the Sedevacantists are saying. Like maybe Vatican II is a lot lighter than even the Society of St. Pius X is saying. Maybe it's, you know, it's not actually that bad. It's not, you know, modernist. Maybe it's really
Vatican
poorly
II
worded.
Vatican II has like a few really difficult portions.
Yeah.
Most of which do have an okay answer.
Yeah.
But it's not a council of apostasy.
What
Yeah.
I always look back to in church history as a parallel of Vatican II, and I think I've talked about this on some cafe episodes before, is the Council of Constance, right?
Oh
Like,
yeah, Constance is a cluster truck.
what we have in the Council of Constance are, you know, frequens and haec sancta, which were very poorly worded, designed in many ways by some of the conciliarist parties like Gerson, to undermine uh, the independent primacy of the Pope. Now that might there were like, of course, a lot of very more benign conciliarists, right? A lot of them were really just trying to figure out how we're going to solve this Great Western Schism, and the papacy itself was in many ways the problem that had to be solved, right? Um, but you have these two documents, and they're written in such a way that could easily lend credence to conciliarism, and I think with more difficulty, actually, it could be read in an orthodox way as simply to discuss how a council can deal with a pope in question, right? Uh, and you know, and Martin V and Eugene IV, they ratified these documents, and I know there's some debate that, well, did they really? Well, they didn't formally condemn them as such. They gave this very ambiguous and very poorly worded phraseology. Uh, and it went something like, you know, we accept the decrees of the council that are favorable to the Catholic faith. You know, that kind of phraseology lends itself to uh, horrible uh, opportunities of abuse and misuse and manipulation, and this, in many ways, I think, maybe Tyrillian can correct me on this, but I think he would agree that in some ways the weakness of Constance laid some of the environmental groundwork for the reformers.
Yes, oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
Constance, a lot of the logic of conciliarism was extended by people like Luther into a kind of idea of a popular sovereignty of the
right.
laity
And do you think
in church matters.
it gave the secular rulers that gave that
Mhm.
catered the reformers ammunition? Uh,
Yes.
and you also have, you know, the conciliarism being these haec sancta and frequens, two conciliar documents of the Council of Constance, uh, being you know, appealed to by Gallicans and Febroniists,
Right. And
and
Well
the,
into the 18th century.
right, yeah,
it
and
would
this
not
wasn't
be
fully resolved until Vatican One
right.
and its definition of papal infallibility. So
Well,
we
the
all
old Catholics, in
accept
a sense, could be called
the conciliarists.
yeah, you should call them in
They
a sense
are.
they are conciliarists.
Right, yeah, I mean,
They
that's their
are also
position.
Jansenists.
Yes. So
But
before you go on, sir, because I think what you were discussing was very important. I just want to say that uh, I don't think there's a single Sedevacantist out there who or even SSPX attendee who rejects the Council of Constance. And yet I think the Council of Constance was one of our worst ecumenical councils, at least in terms of badly worded documents. I know it did culminate in the very important election of Martin V that ended the Great Western Schism, but what I'm saying is, just because documents in an ecumenical council can be read in a heretical way and manipulated by modernists and heretics, that doesn't necessarily mean that the council as such is illegitimate. So that's just what I wanted to say on that.
Right.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah,
important.
can I get back into
Yes.
something else? Sedevacantist is this very, very inflated definition of ordinary and extraordinary magisterium, and that I was coming to this conclusion, and this is kind of a hot topic in and of itself, that what they would say is infallible is not infallible, and that
A
like
lot of it. Yeah.
yes, and
Yes.
that like there's a lot more wiggle room than they give credence to. And like, you know, I'm under the position that like the church isn't infallible when it comes to political matters. Or, you know,
It's tricky, but yeah.
it's tricky, but it's like some of the stuff in Vatican II, like it might not be infallible. I'm talking about
Dignitatis Humanae.
yes, Dignitatis Humanae. And part of how I got through it is I kind of came to this recognition that like Dignitatis Humanae doesn't affect my faith. Like it doesn't call into question like the Trinity. It doesn't like how
People
grace
don't
works in
go to hell.
Catholicism.
People don't go to hell because they supported a bit too much toleration for Protestants.
Yes. Like that doesn't
like people
like
don't like people don't go to hell because they think that like you should err on the side of tolerance and stuff like that. Like I don't know. Perhaps
Yeah,
I'm
no.
wrong here.
No, you're not
but,
wrong.
like people don't go to hell because they're not anti-Semitic.
It makes you.
Well, look,
you can be cringe and go to heaven.
And look,
Yes,
you do
like
have
that's the thing.
you do even have medieval papal precedent for saying like the church doesn't have jurisdiction over the non-baptized, you know.
Yeah.
So like you do have to factor that in. But yeah, please go on, sir.
but basically Dignitatis Humanae, and with the I think the SSPX, if you read what Lefebvre says, and like at the end of the day, if you're going to point to something that's like before the council and after the council that's going to directly contradict each other, it's going to be that document. And it's not like Vatican II, like whatever you think about how the Novus Ordo is said in the common American parish, that doesn't invalidate the Catholic faith. All the Sedevacantist arguments against the Novus Ordo are largely emotional. Now you could argue that it's, you know, it was very crude to replace the traditional mass with the Novus Ordo, but the Novus Ordo is still the Roman Rite. There's no getting by the fact that it's still legally the Roman Rite. You know, when I looked into Father Shikata's arguments about like bishops being infallible, clearly if I follow Pius XII's teachings, in fact, if I follow Pius XII, what he said about the valid consecrations, what needs to be there. In fact, the Novus Ordo seems like it's more valid than the old rite. And it would just come down to these things. And at the end of the day, the chink in the armor was Dignitatis Humanae. And it came down to me as like, is this the Catholic faith? Is it the essentialness? And could this be resolved later? Yes. The essential dogmas established in the 21 or 20 councils before Vatican II and the teaching from the popes before and after Vatican II, it seems that in an essential way, it remains.
Could we go into Dignitatis Humanae a bit?
Before we do that,
I like.
Before we do that, and we might even disagree a little on it, but that's okay. I think it'd be a good discussion. But what I do want to say really quickly is that, even Father Hess said that the new form of episcopal consecration is technically more accurate than the old form.
Uh-huh.
B, um, I would quote Pius XII, Mediator Dei 58, in saying that as much as we might not like it, the Pope does have the authority to have introduced the new form of the Roman Rite. So so Sedevacantist, and a lot of some elements of the SSPX, they love Pius XII. They love Pius XII. They love Pius XII. Pius XII is like their favorite pope. For the life of me, I can never understand why, but it's just the case for a lot of them. They're not really following what he says on the Pope's jurisdiction over the liturgy.
Well, if you go into Father Shikata, if you read his book on the work of human hands, and you read through that, the beginning of the reforms of the liturgy do start with Pius XII under his papacy.
And there are many.
The Holy Week, most prominently.
Yeah,
and the thing
Pius
is,
X's reform of the breviary as well.
Yes,
like Pius XII opened the door to a lot of things that a lot of Sedevacantists don't like. He opened the door. I mean, he's the first to explicitly approve of natural family planning, which the Diamond Brothers think is like demonic, essentially. Let's not talk about that in detail, but that's one example.
We're not saying it's evil, by the way.
He abolished the Roman nobility.
He abolished the Roman nobility. He allowed the use of biblical criticism in Bible translations.
Yes.
That's one that I can that's as bad as to me. That's as bad as the Novus Ordo with Paul VI.
It's as bad as
was
anything.
Horrible.
It's as bad as Amoris Laetitia.
Also, and again, I'm not really anti-evolution in these circles. I'm not a young Earth creationist. Sorry, I'd like to be though. He did allow qualified acceptance of evolution, which a lot of trads don't like as well. There's a lot of stuff that Pius XII allowed.
And so but by that very thing, with the biblical criticism and the evolution thing alone, then why is it the majority of Sedevacantists draw the line with him? It makes it sound arbitrary,
Because here's the point, and classical theism, you have discussed it, is you can't draw a line. You have to draw a line at Vatican II, because if you create the precedent where lay people can depope people, then what's stopping you from depoping
becoming
everybody
Richard
to
Brani?
Peter? Yes.
Yeah. Well, we should talk about that for a second.
At the end of the day, the Holy See is judged by no one. Now, that doesn't mean you can't criticize him, but that does mean he is immune to ecclesiastical and canonical censure.
Yeah.
Okay?
So,
because sovereignty has to stop somewhere. And if it's down to the laity to, quote, recognize that the Pope has been deposed, which, that's just deposition with extra steps. That's just deposition with extra steps. That is the biggest cope in the history of copes ever, to say that there's a difference between recognizing that the Pope has lost his office and deposing him. Functionally, in terms of mechanically, they're not different. That he's not really the Pope.
Go ahead, CT.
Yeah,
it's a very bad precedent.
With what's stopping you from going down the route of Richard E. Brani and digging into the deep history of the popes and finding minor contradictions between predecessors and successors, and ultimately depriving the church of a valid papacy for hundreds of years? I mean,
just keep depoping on down.
I mean, what Richard E. Brani does is he says that, scholasticism introduced a lot of novel philosophical ideas, not exactly necessarily true, but introduced a lot of novel philosophical ideas and applied them to the faith. And we can read how this is admonished by earlier church fathers. And so I'm going to deprive
It is just the second in his case.
Yes. I'm going to deprive those popes of their office unto the present. we might
If
say
we could,
that's absurd, and it is absurd, but ultimately, his logic is that, well, according to my reading of church history, according to my reading of primordial Catholic theology, this pope at this seemingly arbitrary period in time goes against my understanding of this primordial Catholic deposit of faith, and therefore, because a formal heretic ipso facto loses his office, that pope has lost his office. It's using the same logic, and it does relativize the faith to our own subjective interpretation of what the deposit of faith consists in. You know,
At that point, if you're going to go that far back, then why not just be Eastern Orthodox?
right? It saves you a lot. It saves you a big headache. At least you have a mass to go to.
Yeah, you have a liturgy. But
and I mean, a fair amount of them do become.
Yes.
yeah, there is a one, The View from 23rd Street, I think the blog's called, which is basically about how this Frenchman, the French translator for the Diamond Brothers, and about how he was spirited away to the Eastern schismatic churches by J. Dyer because of just following the logic of Sedevacantism. It's very sad. Trent Horn recently did some responses to J. Dyer that might be worth
They
people's
were
time.
pretty good.
Yeah.
Have some issues with them, but pretty good.
Yeah, we can discuss those another time.
Trent Horn is a good guy. He's fundamentally a good guy.
Yeah, so don't be.
He's just a bit goofy.
Yeah, he's a little bit of a normie, but his content, insofar as it's useful, is useful. But but you were saying, Serp, that you also, I remember when you showed me scans of the books that you had read about, the Oxford history of the popes and some real scholarly, stuff about the papacy and so you were talking about Liberius and Honorius earlier, and others, and so how did that help you work through Sedevacantism?
You know, a pope committed apostasy. That, I don't know, there was something that happened where a light switch went on in my brain that was the extraordinary magisterium and the ordinary magisterium that they're saying is a lot smaller, and that what constitutes what you need to believe isn't exactly what you really have to believe to attain salvation isn't what they are, and what's been made into dogma isn't as wide ranging as they claim it is.
Can I anticipate an objection to your claim about Pope Marcellinus?
Mm-hmm.
Some people, I've used this argument, and some of them say, well, the historical scholarship is very dubious about that. Well, that doesn't do it for me, because if the basic legitimacy of the papal succession up until at least the 20th century is dependent on varying interpretations of historical scholarship, I think we're in trouble.
Yeah.
Because
but in
maybe you're right.
well,
maybe he never apostatized. Maybe that's maybe historically that's not necessarily true. But there's certainly a lot of reputable scholars who think he did, and
you know what? That's the same kind of historical skepticism that decimates not only Catholicism and Orthodoxy, but also Protestantism and the reliability of Scripture as well.
yes, exactly. So I think the response to that is not to just argue back and forth about the historicity of Pope Marcellinus's apostasy. It's to rework your overarching theory about jurisdiction and the relationship between the presence of heresy and the maintenance of office. That will save us from the difficulty that would ensue otherwise. But go on.
Just that the power of the papacy and the continuance of it, and from a spiritual sense, just the reality of the necessity it is for the religion as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah,
there has to be something that's pretty interesting to say is that, there are conclavists among Sedevacantists that it is pretty essential to the form of the Catholic faith that you do need a pope.
In some ways, the conclavists are smarter.
When I remember when I asked you why, like, what the biggest reason why Sedevacantism is wrong, Serp, when I met you, and you said the fundamental issue is that under Sedevacantism jurisdiction dies out. And how would you elaborate
that's how
on
you
that?
lead to the homo loner movement. If you don't have a pope, you don't have, under the Catholic framework, you don't really have the ability for jurisdiction to continue indefinitely.
Yeah. Eventually, all the valid cardinals die.
And then you no longer have the ability to elect a pope. And you just are stuck in this conundrum. And then the Sedevacantist will say, I don't know how to get out, but I know I'm right.
But one day, St. Peter is going to descend from heaven, and he's going to crown his own pope.
Pastor Aeternus, which is the same document that defines papal infallibility, also says that Peter will have perpetual successors until the consummation of the world.
This is Pope Michael's argument, by the way. His argument is directly from Pastor Aeternus, that exact line that he uses to justify his own election. And really, yeah. Go ahead.
Can I maybe talk a bit about Dignitatis Humanae versus Quanto Cura?
Yeah,
and just like I just want to illustrate how small the differences are in my argument, which is that Dignitatis Humanae unwittingly collapses into the more traditional position.
Yeah, I might want to riff on that a bit because I think I'll agree with it very strongly. So
yes, so the thing about Dignitatis Humanae is that Dignitatis Humanae basically says is that everyone has the fundamental right to religious freedom because you need to be able to choose, like you need to have a genuine choice to make for Catholicism, and that
the assent of the mind has to be free.
Yes, and that persecution is allowed, however, within due limit. Religious freedom has to exist within due limits, and the good of the social order can make persecution licit. Okay, now let's unpack just how much that implies. Okay, if you can persecute for the good of the social order, that means the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre was justified. Because the Protestants were trying to launch a coup in France. This was spontaneous mob violence, by the way, all across France. I just want to keep unpacking this a bit.
Yeah.
That means that you can kill any members of any denomination. You can silence of any denomination who think it's okay to masturbate or contracept or do anything that goes against Catholic sexual teaching. That means that Islam can be completely eradicated from your country because it's a dangerous religion. There is so much leeway there, but it goes further than that. The social order is not something really separable from the religious order. Because the ultimate end of human life is union with God, right? And therefore, the ultimate end of society has to be directed towards the divine, towards a theological end.
Yes.
And therefore, the good of the social order, if it is a Catholic social order, can include, if such a thing is even intelligible, purely, quote, religious persecution. The thing is that the religious secular distinction is a completely modern fabrication that doesn't make sense, and no one has ever been able to give a coherent account of it.
Yep.
And so it doubly collapses into the more traditional position. Now let's go with Quanto Cura.
Yeah.
Quanto Cura isn't saying social orders have to persecute Protestants. It's not saying social orders have to, start burning people right now. Quanto Cura, which is a document by Pius IX, which is often cited as, the document that contradicts Dignitatis Humanae.
It's definitive, by the way.
Yeah, it is definitive. It says, that all Catholics must reprobate, reject, and condemn these opinions. So, Secura, what it does say, though, is that you can't claim under the pretext of religious freedom the right to offend against the Catholic faith.
Right.
Dignitatis Humanae does not say that you have the right to desecrate the host. It doesn't say you even have the right to speak a single word against Catholicism. It's basically securing very, very, very minimal levels of freedom of conscience and the like. And it doesn't bind people with any kind of anathema or any kind of theological censure at all. Now, some people will say, well, Vatican II at the beginning of its in the preamble says that like all this is going to be made law, et cetera, et cetera. But laws without a penalty attached to them, dead letter. So I just, sorry for the ramble there, but I wanted to just get all that verbal vomit out. Yeah.
I think that was really good. If I could add on to it, though, I would say another thing that Dignitatis Humanae is doing is it's articulating a scenario under which the temporal order is severed from the spiritual order already.
Mm-hmm.
So what Dignitatis Humanae and even the 1983 Code of Canon Law acknowledge is that I'll back up a second. When it says that man has a right to religious freedom, they're talking about a kind of liberty that does exist in the natural law, and that is to say, it's a right not to be coerced in this or that way. Now, we all have a right not to be coerced from each other, because none of us have authority. I can't coerce you by law to do anything. But the state does. The state has that authority. Now, in religious matters, does the right to coerce come from the state or from the church? And Dignitatis Humanae would say that it comes from the church. The church is the source of that right. And the 1983 Code of Canon Law backs that up, because the 1983 Code of Canon Law explicitly says that the church has coercive power over the baptized. Okay? That's the 1983 Code of Canon Law. And because of that, if we're talking about a secular state that has renounced a soul body union with the higher potestas, the church, then does it have of itself the right to coerce religiously except in order to maintain public peace? No, it doesn't have it of itself. It needs it has it insofar as it can act as an organ of the church in a soul body union. And once that happens, then the Quanticura comes into effect, right? And you have a confessional state whereby baptism is integrally bound up in the very constitution of the state itself. And then so you have a very clear foundation upon which the church can exercise her authority through the state as an organ. But if the church is speaking to nations, none of which are confessional states at all, then might it be in her interest to advocate for a religious freedom within states that she already foresees are probably going to be very hostile toward her in the long run? I mean, to just look at today. So I think you can take both elements of Catholic teaching, and both of them can actually have pragmatic import in their own way. I gotta tell you, I very much would support religious liberty directives in the United States very strongly. You know why? Because President Biden doesn't like my views on homosexuality and abortion and contraception. He hates nuns. Kamala Harris has a visceral hatred of Catholicism. And so I'm going to Dignitatis Humanae in this case might be my best friend, because I'm going to fight for the church's rights to be to have religious freedom from state coercion, which doesn't have authority to coerce religiously in itself. So I think what you said, Tyrillian, is very important, and I was just sort of adding to it.
Yeah.
No, and that's very important. Yeah, it's a good, that was a good digression, because it's a key issue for the Sedevacantists in the controversy of everything that's going on. And Serp, I mean, even if so on the popes, to kind of go back on it a little bit, was there any other was it Marcellinus's potential apostasy and reconciliation to the church, because he is a saint now. He is a saint.
Well, he is a saint.
Right, yeah, he's
He
reconciled after.
He reconciled and willingly received martyrdom.
Martyrdom.
But
right.
the question is, like, if he apostatized, then he should have lost his office ipso facto, and therefore, like, I don't think there's any mechanism within Sedevacantist literature to justify, unless you're like a Sedevacanist.
Was there any other popes that helped you question the?
Okay, so Honorius is like the greatest example of this. I forget exactly. Wasn't he like after his death? Wasn't it examined, like his pronunciation?
Condemned by the council.
Yeah, basically he was probably, or at least possibly, a monophyllite, which is one of those really autistically specific Christological.
But
yeah. He was, which it's one of those autistically specific Christological heresies.
Mm-hmm. I actually think a really good papal example is John the 12th. Because
is that where he said that no one will go to heaven until the general resurrection?
No, that's John the 22nd.
John the 12th, I think you can point to certain aspects of his personal life which clearly indicate that he did not hold the faith. Like, there are attested stories that in the Lateran Palace he would invoke pagan deities. Okay? And of course he would have like he would engage in sexual acts.
He died in the arms of another man's wife when that Giga Chad man came in and killed both of them.
but I mean, just so to me, like, I look at him and I think I don't think it's possible to really invoke pagan deities while you fully accept all of the dogmas of the Catholic Church. But yeah, go on with other popes, because I know
Honorius, John the 12th, John the 22nd, Marcinellus, Liberius, Marcellinus, sorry, Liberius. He supposedly tortured and then refused to was tortured to the point where he gave in on his condemnation of Arianism. And so on, and obviously the Council of Constance.
What do the Sedevacantists say in light of all of that, Serp? Like, what usually?
Well, the Sedevacantist talking point is usually that there's never been any. That's all like Protestant fabrications. It's all, it's
bad
all
historical scholarship.
It's all Pope Pius X on down. Every single pope that has ever lived is him on down. Something to that respect. And if you try to like question them, then they go into Protestants made it up.
And because what I noticed about that priest who went to join, Sanborn's seminary after leaving his diocese in Virginia, was that he basically said, it is impossible for the church to be. He could not see any way for the church to be indefectible without Sedevacantism being true. And
yeah, well, they really.
What did he say? How did it defect from his point of view?
When
you look into what he points to say it defected, what is he gonna say? Is he gonna say like Paul VI is a saint?
I don't know.
Should I go on a Novus Ordo watch and like track down his letter here?
Let me get it. I got it. Novus Ordo priest becomes Sedevacantist. So this was Reverend Michael G. Desay, Um, and so he says that basically he says that he just so his letter basically reads that he just started questioning Vatican II more. And he said that it's basically just Second Vatican II, and he considers Vatican II to be a rupture, and that you can't do the hermeneutic of continuity. That it's not tenable. And in some ways, you know, Benedict's hermeneutic of continuity is somewhat novel, but like the discontinuity of Vatican II is everything bad with what it's done? Yes, and I'm going to send it to the group chat. But has it really caused that much of a rupture? No, there's severe problems in the church right now, but like there's a way to see that no, the church is still the church.
Right. And you have to utilize the hermeneutic of continuity for earlier confusing periods of church history. The gravity is not the same, I grant, but the principle is.
It's a difference of degree.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm looking at, is his name Father Michael G. Desane?
Yeah.
Okay, so he says allowing the Orthodox to receive communion. And then he just says read Syllabus of Errors, basically. It's not very demanding. He just says, like, Vatican II contradicts the Syllabus of Errors
My name is
citation
Deacon
needed.
Michael
And he
Desay.
says that
I'm
allowing
34
the
years
Orthodox to
old,
receive
and I'm
communion
calling concerning
invalidates
church in a more
Catholic Church or something.
I even knew.
Yeah, I think that it I apologize. I played a little bit of the video. But so he probably just cracked from Francis.
Yep. Yeah, this is what
He
happened
got
to
buck
me.
broken. He got buck broken by Francis.
He's a guy that drew a line and then the line got crossed, and maybe he either cracked or he's a line drawer.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you?
I mean, I'm a line drawer too. Well, I mean,
I'm a line,
I draw a line
but I
at
mean,
women
like,
priests.
I drew a line that wasn't the right line to draw, right?
Mine is women priests.
And you know what's funny? It's like,
I don't think that's ever gonna happen.
you know what's funny? It's like the one
I
pope,
believe that with perfect faith. Go
the
on.
pope that they hate the most, at least maybe less than Paul VI, but one of the popes that they really hate is the one who invoked his infallible charism to condemn women priests.
Women priests, JP2, yeah.
Which,
Ordinatio
when you really
Sacerdotis.
think about it, like, this is in the 1990s, feminism was baked in the cake for a long time. To come out with a statement like that at that time, it's pretty.
Well, didn't he do it in
takes a lot to
reaction
do
to the Anglican Church
it took a lot.
head to
It
allow
took a lot for Paul VI.
Yeah, I believe.
Paul VI maintained papal or priestly celibacy, which resulted in like a lot of people leaving.
Yeah.
Well,
Like a lot of
Humanae,
there in the spirit of Vatican II, all these priests thought they'd be able to get married, so they got married and then just sat there waiting for them to be able to become priests again. And then Paul VI is like, nope.
and think of Humanae Vitae, how much pressure he was under. You know, and I'm not saying like
Paul VI is a hero or something.
Heroically virtuous pope, but I am saying that I think God's providence is such that, you know, those papacies, as difficult as they were, we don't know what could have happened. Okay, you know, things. I think the modern decay is so bad that I think maybe in God's providence, those popes might have been a mercy.
Yeah. Completely true. I agree with that.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. John Paul II kissed a Quran, so like, Sedevacantism is true.
Yeah.
But that's how they argue. It's very emotionalistic. It's very, look at this. Now are you Sedevacantist?
Look at the Abrahamic family house. Do you see? And it's like I've known about NWO in the Vatican for a long time. Please leave me alone.
Look at this tribal man in front of Benedict XVI.
Or here's one. Look at this black guy who's a Catholic. Are you still gonna be Christian, cuck?
Yes.
From a pagan, like perspective, obviously.
So, what would you say then, Serp, to those that are in Sedevacantism now, feel very comfortable there, or those who are? What would you say to those questioning Sedevacantism and considering Orthodoxy or Catholicism? And then what would you say to those that are very comfortable in Sedevacantism and why they should reconsider their position? And then everybody can give their 2 cents as well.
So why? So do you want me to talk about Eastern Orthodoxy there?
So I'm saying why someone who is coming out of Sedevacantism and they see themselves at a fork in the road, why should they just return to the Roman Catholic Church?
I mean, it's the church founded by Christ. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Why you should return if you were a Sedevacantist? It's the Church of Christ. Most of the Sedevacantist arguments are built upon emotionalism or turning Dignitatis Humanae into something it's not. And I think that we've covered that very well. Now, turning to Eastern Orthodoxy, and I'm going to get back around to this. Now, if you're a Catholic that wants to become Eastern Orthodox, why you shouldn't become Eastern Orthodox? Well, what is Eastern Orthodoxy? Are they in communion with each other? Could this be the one true church that Christ founded? Or are these people that are on paper in communion with each other and aren't really in communion with each other? Are these national churches? Well, often not even on paper, but are these just national churches that maintain the trappings that you enjoy of traditionalism? And can these people who I wouldn't call a one church, let alone the one true church, could they form up a unequivocal leader to represent them? Could they form up a council? And now returning to Sedevacantism, could these Sedevacantists, could they form up a single leader to represent them? Could they form a council to elect a new pope, or a council to condemn Vatican II? You know, they don't really have the power to this. And in the 4 marks of the church, 1, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. Sedevacantism is not apostolic. We talked about this. Sedevacantism is not one. And, you know, Sedevacantism is not universal in the way that the Roman Catholic Church is. In some sense, it's Gnostic. Are Chinese people and Filipino people and, you know, Indian people and Russian people and people in Africa, are they just not part of the charism of the elect because they don't have a Sedevacantist church that they can communicate with? They have no ability to communicate with it, and it's like they need to somehow sense Gnostically that, like, the Catholic Church that appears to be the true Church of Christ is not, and it's been tainted by Vatican II. And then, you know, is it holy? Would God save his church through the orders of Archbishop Thuc having dementia? Would God use a man with dementia to save his church? You know, I don't think the Catholic...
A manipulated man with dementia.
Yeah,
at that.
Possibly a kidnapped or manipulated man, or a man committing simony. So is Sedevacantism one? No. Is Sedevacantism holy? I don't think so. Is Sedevacantism Catholic? No, it's certainly not. Is it apostolic? No, it's not. It's not any of the 4 marks of the church. Could we point to the Roman Catholic Church and say, is it the one holy Catholic and apostolic church? Certainly.
And I will say one thing about Orthodoxy. If Sedevacantists in particular, you know, they see John Paul II's Assisi meeting and they say, okay, I need something better than this. Well, how many Orthodox patriarchs were at Assisi? I believe even Russia was there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Like all of these ecumenical movements that the recent popes have engaged in,
I just want to say
the
something
Orthodox
real
are
quick.
complicit in them. And
If I may,
yeah, just one second. So like, yeah, the Orthodox are complicit in them, and yes, I understand that you have a different theology of magisterial obedience, and I understand that you, although you can't agree on it, and you also can't agree on what makes Episcopal teaching authoritative and all of these things, but who can you be in communion with if the sources of ecclesiastical communion are all complicit in these very ecumenical get-togethers that you condemn?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Anyway, go on, Tyrillian.
The ironic thing that you see in a lot of traditional Catholicism is a lot of the objection to Vatican II is essentially ecclesiological. Vatican II stresses the more invisible elements of the church, and a lot of this is a reaction against the abuse of that stress on the invisible aspects of the church. But the irony is that in order for Sedevacantism to become tractable, you basically have to reject that kind of hard, visible church ecclesiology, and so it's a completely stolen concept.
You need to embrace Lumen Gentium, even beyond the limits of Lumen Gentium.
Because you're rejecting the idea of one unified church, which, maybe has tendrils and roots that touch and draw in people who aren't yet visibly linked to it. You have to reject that and basically just embrace the invisible aspect. It's actually very ironic when you think about it.
It is.
Well,
I think
it
that's a
ends
great
up
point.
turning it into a Gnostic religion because, it's very much like a Gnostic ecclesiology of where you have to read all these documents which might not even be translated in your language, and come to that this is like the demiurge church, and it's not the true church, and you have to find the online Catholics.
And it's like if you're
to Jesus through the Diamond Brothers.
if your Novus Ordo is that just bad, drive. Just go drive. And there are Latin masses. I mean, it's getting tougher now, but there are still Latin masses. There are reverent Novus Ordos. No, I'm not saying that the Novus Ordo is like a perfect rite or anything. But just be Catholic.
I'll say this, the Novus Ordo is like doing the bare minimum, and the Latin Mass is like praying 5 decades a day.
Yeah.
It's like, that's the difference. It's not that the Novus Ordo is evil, it's that the Novus Ordo is really, really, really just not. You're really just doing
We
the bare
really
minimum.
need to revive the concept of supererogation.
Yeah. And even in the Novus Ordo, it's like, you really think that, the old 78-year-old grandmother who goes to Mass literally every day, does a holy hour every day, and prays the rosary to end abortion before daily Mass every day, and, voted for Trump because she wanted the evil of Joe Biden to not persecute the church. Do you really think she's not Catholic?
Right. I see some of these old ladies at the Novus Ordo, and they behave in the Novus Ordo exactly like how one should behave in the traditional Latin Mass.
Yeah.
Many of them are veiled. They're praying the rosary. They have their missals out. I don't know why they need them in the Novus Ordo, but they have their missals out. You can sense the interior supernatural faith in them.
Yeah, and it's things are bad, but just stay Catholic.
Yeah.
So I think I will post this probably on Friday, but this was really good. Any last words, gentlemen?
I'm good.
All right.
Pray for the Pope.
Yes.
Yeah, that's important. Yes. Yeah, and pray for and don't just make it a statement. We really should be praying yes, for Pope Francis, also just for a restoration of the Roman See. We should just pray for that.
I
The
think
dignity of the Roman See,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
the Roman See as such, but its dignity.
I think we'll have to do a video about the 3 days of darkness and the angelic pope and the great Catholic monarch at some point, because that's kind of hanging there. But
You need to finish Lord of this World, because that kind of goes into that too, and conception of the Antichrist as well.
yes. Alrighty. Well, I'm gonna let the Goliard singing take y'all out. But thanks a lot for joining us, everybody, and we're gonna say goodbye. Bye, everybody.
See ya.
In Taberna, quanto?
Vivi, era, vivi, veros, vivi, vives, vivi, veros, vivi, ille, vivi,